Snowy was quite stunned as she held the two fruits in her paws. Meanwhile, Xianxia walked over to her. Snowy put the fruits aside and started waving her claws swiftly, growing increasingly excited over time. But in the end, it was dejection that covered her face. An absolute treasure. Snowy was telling him that the bamboo chest was a great treasure. A very, very good one. The best she'd ever seen. Xianxia rubbed Snowy's head and spoke softly. "We've gained a lot already, haven't we?" Snowy was still quite dejected because it had been communicating with her. In other words, it was willing to choose her. But it didn't take long for Snowy's gaze to fall on the fruits. Meanwhile, Oxy, the primal true dragon, and Arya left Xianxia's body. The dragon stared at the fruit while burning desire and greed was clearly visible in its eyes. Oxy was staring at them too. However, it held back a little and frequently gazed at Snowy. It was very well aware that Snowy was the fruit's owner. As for Arya, she was better than both of them. She grabbed one of them and started sizing it up. Snowy wasn't infuriated by this because she was very close with Arya. Every time Arya had a tonghulu, she would let Snowy have a few licks, so they always had tonghulu together. They were very close. Arya sized it up for a long time and said, "This fruit is very good." She passed it to Snowy. Snowy blinked, and then passed it back to her. Obviously, she was giving it to Arya. Arya shook her head. "It's yours. It's a treasure. So you eat it." Snowy glanced at Xianxia, glanced at Arya, and then passed it to Arya again. Arya shook her head and spoke very seriously. "It's really very good. So you have it." Snowy thought for a moment, and then she took a bite before passing it to Arya. Arya thought for a moment and took a bite too. Oxy and the primal true dragon's eyes almost popped out. Especially the dragon, it was even drooling. That was dragon saliva. A short while later, Snowy seemed to have thought of something and gazed at Oxy, causing the latter to become nervous. Snowy thought for a moment, gazed at the fruit, and then pulled. The fruit was split into two, but it didn't seem to be enough. So Snowy put them together and pulled again. For pieces. The fruit had been turned into 4 pieces. Snowy gave Arya one and Oxy one. At this moment, Oxy was trembling with happiness. At this moment, it wouldn't hesitate to do anything Snowy asked of it. As for the last 2 pieces, Snowy gazed at the primal true dragon. It instantly became nervous. Snowy hesitated for a moment and passed one to the primal true dragon. It gulped, gazed at Snowy, and then pointed at the fruit. It was asking if it was really for it. Snowy tossed it over to the primal true dragon, and the latter grabbed it immediately. However, it glanced at Snowy. Snowy still had one more fruit. Snowy gazed at it, and then suddenly vanished. She entered the primordial pagoda, or to be more precise, she'd gone to Zir. She cracked a smile and passed it to Zir. Zir was stunned. A short while later, Zir rubbed Snowy's head and said, "You have it." Snowy shook her head and started waving her paws. She was telling Zir that it was very, very useful to her. Actually, Zir had sensed it. As soon as she saw the fruit, she knew that it could take her to an unprecedented height. She gazed at Snowy, and her heart felt really warm as she gazed at the mischievous little fellow before her. She took the fruit, split it in half and gave half to Snowy. "We'll share it, all right?" Snowy thought for a moment and nodded. After that, she took it and left the primordial pagoda. Zir took a small bite and its juices flowed within her. In an instant, her body shook violently, and then countless strands of violet light surged out around her. At the same time, her aura rose explosively. Outside the primordial pagoda, Snowy went over to Xianxia. She pointed at the fruit, pointed at Xianxia, and then waved her paw. She was saying that it wouldn't help Xianxia at all. Xianxia rubbed her little head and smiled. "It's fine. You eat it." Snowy shook her head instead. She raised her paw, and there were 2 pitch-black seeds in her grasp. She cracked a smile at Xianxia and placed them in the rear mountains of the sword sect within the primordial pagoda. From this moment onward, Snowy had another job every day, and it was to nourish the seeds with spirit energy. Not only with the spirit energy from her, but primordial violet energy too. As for the other half, Snowy didn't eat it, nor did she give it away. She hid it away somewhere even Xianxia didn't know, and he didn't know what she planned to do with it either. The primal true dragon, Oxy, and Wang area exchanged glances after they consumed their share of the fruit. In the end, the primal true dragon and Oxy returned to the rear mountains in the primordial pagoda, and then powerful auras swept out from there. As for Arya, she seemed very calm. However, Xianxia could sense that changes were occurring within her. However, it wasn't as obvious as the dragon and Oxy. Meanwhile, Nanli Meng suddenly asked, "Is he gone?" Xianxia gazed at her and nodded. She said, "Then let's go." As she spoke, she walked off toward the depths of the gorge. Meanwhile, Xianxia asked, "Don't you want to know who it was?" She smiled. "He only allowed you to see him, so that represents that it's your fortune. Thus, what's the point of me finding out?" Xianxia thought for a moment and said, "He asked me to pass you a message." Nanli Meng was quite curious. "What?" Xianxia replied, "He said your aspirations are great, and your path is very special and interesting too. Besides that, he said you shouldn't try to force things too much because forcing something is obsession, and obsession comes in shades of both good and bad. A single hindered thought may destroy everything. Do not obsess." Nanli Meng closed her eyes slowly, and a long time passed before she opened them again. She gazed at the entrance of the gorge and said, "Thank you." As she spoke, she gazed at Xianxia. "Congratulations." Obviously, Xianxia had obtained a very, very huge amount of benefits. Xianxia smiled. "It was all thanks to Snowy. I wouldn't have been able to get anything without her." Nanli Meng glanced at Snowy, who was snoring on Xiangxia's shoulder. Snowy was just lying there on Xiangxia's shoulder with her arms around his neck. It was like she was hanging from him. She felt very safe like that. Up until now, Nanli Meng still couldn't figure out why a sprite progenitor would rely on Xianxia so much. Moreover, Xianxia was even someone who killed a lot. Actually, when someone was in their most difficult moment, it's also the time they remember kindness most easily. Even if it was just a small kindness. Snowy had met Xianxia at her darkest moment, so she stayed with him forever. They continued forward. The gorge was huge, and they finally walked out of it around an hour later. At this moment, the sky had darkened. The veil of night descended. There was no moonlight, and the world was covered in darkness. Snowy had sensed a good treasure, and it was up ahead. Actually, Snowy was quite disinterested now. Her mind was filled with the small bamboo chest. It wasn't that the chest itself was very good, but there were numerous treasures within it. Nanli Meng glanced at the surroundings and said, "Let's stop here." Xianxia was puzzled. "Why?" She glanced into the distance. "Ghosts roam at night." Xianxia was stunned speechless. They sat down at the exit of the gorge, and Xianxia entered the primordial pagoda. The blood of a god. Xianxia withdrew the white jade bottle and the myriad world diagram. His gaze descended on the blood. Give it to Invincible and the sword precursor? He'd thought of it, but it only took a moment for him to abandon that thought. While it could improve them, he hadn't forgotten what the old man had told him. It would destroy their spirits. Even Invincible had a spirit. It was the vengeful spirits, of course. After he abandoned that thought, Xianxia opened the bottle. There were 5 drops of blood within it, dark red drops of blood. Consume 1. Meanwhile, Sword Scroll appeared by his side. She glanced at them. "It's best if you don't consume them for now. It's not ordinary. If you can't endure their strength, you won't just be unable to improve your strength, you may destroy yourself." Xianxia nodded. The energy within the blood made even his heart palpitate slightly. Simply speaking, his intuition told him that he would suffer terribly if he consumed the blood. But it was best for him to remain at his prime in this damnable place. Besides that, he had to stay vigilant against Nanli Meng. He didn't want to fall into a trap. Suddenly, Sword Scroll said, "Go to Baizhixian." Xianxia was about to ask when she left. He hesitated for a moment and went to Baizhixian's mountain, Immortal Radiance Peak. It was a name Baizhixian had given it. In a palace, a wave of fragrance assaulted him as soon as he entered the hall. Xianxia walked inside, and there was a large bath deep within it. A woman was lying silently in the pool. It was Bai Zhixian. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and said, "Give me a moment." He left the primordial pagoda and gazed at Nanli Meng, who was seated cross-legged nearby. "I'm going inside to cultivate for a while. I'll leave our safety to you." He immediately entered the primordial pagoda once he finished speaking. At the side of the pool, Yang Yi waved his right hand, and his clothes vanished. Meanwhile, Bai Zhixian suddenly stood up. She had nothing on her. Mutual cultivation. The world was divided into yin and yang, and all things had their counterpart. If there was yin, there was yang, and the union of yin and yang was a type of grand Tao too. In the beginning, it wasn't very smooth, but they grew more and more proficient as time passed. Many positions appeared in Bai Zhixian's mind, and they were called yin-yang techniques in the yin-yang sect. There were a total of 36 of them, and they were Fuchsia, pushing the cart, seated on a lotus, descending the mountain. Each had their own benefits. In the beginning, Bai Zhixian wasn't very proficient in these techniques, but as they grew more and more into it, it didn't take long for those positions to be used, one after the other. As for Yang Yi, he'd experienced a different kind of pleasure. It was something impossible to describe with words. 2 hours later, Yang Yi laid by the pool, and Bai Zhixian was in his arms. The pool was in a mess. Bai Zhixian's face was quite rose, as if she's been drinking. Yang Yi rubbed something in his right hand as he spoke softly. "Fate is truly miraculous. When he arrived at Eternal Dimension, he'd almost killed her, and she'd almost killed him. But in the blink of an eye, they had become an intimate pair." Many people didn't think much of the relationship between men and women on their path of cultivation, and countless engaged in one-night stands to gain what they wanted. But Yang Yi refused to do that. Since he'd chosen to be with someone, it was forever. Bai Zhixian spoke softly in his arms. "Actually, I really miss the days in Eternal Village." Eternal Village. Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly. Actually, he missed it a little too. In that place, he didn't have to think about anything, and he felt no pressure. It was very peaceful. Moreover, he missed the people there like Butcher, the slovenly old man, Anti-Veg, and Wang Aria's grandfather. Suddenly, Bai Zhixian sat on Yang Yi, smiled seductively, and said, "There's a move in my technique called Beauty Plays the Flute. Would you like to try it?" Yang Yi was stunned. Meanwhile, Bai Zhixian suddenly slid down, and then her head went underwater. Yang Yi slowly clenched his fists. 2 hours later, Yang Yi left the primordial pagoda. Outside the primordial pagoda, there was a bonfire not too far away from Nanli Meng. She glanced at Yang Yi. "Cultivating?" Yang Yi nodded. "Cultivating." Actually, it wasn't wrong. While they had been mutually cultivating, he'd gained from it. The Yin-Yang sect was a top-rate sect during the primal era. So, their cultivation technique was definitely not something ordinary. Even though the mutual cultivation hadn't allowed him to instantly advance in his realm of cultivation, it had improved his cultivation. Moreover, it was quite an increase too. According to what he thought, he should engage in more mutual cultivation. He was certain that it wouldn't be long before he attained the true world realm. Nanli Meng ignored Yang Yi. She sat cross-legged and ceaselessly read the scroll before her. Yang Yi asked, "You wrote this?" "Yes." Nanli Meng spoke softly without looking up. Yang Yi said, "What's in it?" Nanli Meng glanced at him and said, "One divine treasure." Yang Yi closed his eyes as if he hadn't asked. She chuckled. "Let me tell you that even 100 divine treasures won't be able to buy this in the future." Yang Yi shrugged and didn't say anything in response. Silence ensued. A long time later, a ray of brilliant sword energy flashed through the sky. It shot up into the clouds and tore through the sky. The sword howl drew both Yang Yi and Nanli Meng's gazes. They exchanged glances, and then they stood up and rushed in that direction. "It's that sword cultivator." As they traveled, Nanli Meng spoke solemnly. "That sword cultivator who broke open this place's restrictions." She suddenly stopped and gazed at Yang Yi. "If I'm not wrong, the experts of those powers are definitely in here. While their target is that sword cultivator, they will definitely attack you if they see you. So, obviously, she was telling him to find a way to conceal himself. Yang Yi thought for a moment, and then he covered himself in a black robe. While he didn't fear ordinary limit-breaker realm experts, they had many experts together. If he encountered all of them, he would definitely suffer. When he had sufficient strength, he didn't have to keep a low profile, but when he didn't have sufficient strength, it was best to do so. Only a fool wouldn't keep a low profile when he didn't have sufficient strength. Nanli Meng nodded. Let's go. She sped up once she finished speaking. They didn't choose to fly. In a place like this, flying was too obvious. They were here to find treasures and not look for trouble. They passed through a forest and arrived at a swamp. Nanli Meng stopped by the swamp. She gazed at it for a long time, and then she turned around to look at Yang Yi. Ask that little fellow if there's anything dangerous here. Yang Yi was stunned. Hurry up, Nanli Meng said. That little fellow is very sensitive to danger. Just ask her. Yang Yi summoned Snowy and pointed at the swamp. Is there any danger here? Snowy rubbed her drowsy eyes, and then she rubbed Yang Ye's chest with slight dissatisfaction. She had been sleeping. Yang Yi felt quite helpless. Nanli Meng said, Little fellow, is there danger here? Help us. Nanli Meng's face suddenly became unsightly, because the little fellow on Yang Ye's chest was snoring again. Nanli Meng shook her head and sighed. She's definitely a fake sprite progenitor. A fake. Absolutely a fake. Yang Yi patted Snowy but lightly and said, Little fellow, help me see if it's dangerous here. Snowy rubbed her butt, glanced at the swamp, then shook her head. After that, she hugged Yang Ye's neck and fell asleep while hanging onto his neck. Yang Yi felt quite helpless. He lifted her up to his shoulder and gazed at Nanli Meng. There's no danger. Let's go. As soon as he finished speaking, he tapped his right foot against the ground and leaped up into the air, descending at the center of the swamp. Nanli Meng followed closely behind him. The swamp was huge, much larger than they'd expected. They kept jumping for almost an hour before they saw the end of it. Yang Yi descended onto a piece of wood, and he was about to jump again when his expression suddenly changed drastically. His figure shot up into the sky. Meanwhile, a huge black shadow shot up from within the swamp and tried to bite him. Yang Yi finally saw it clearly. It was a colossus like a crocodile, but it was slightly different. It had a pair of horns, a row of spikes on its back, and a long tail that seemed like that of a dragon. Yang Ye's expression was extremely unsightly. He glared at Snowy, who had an innocent expression on her face, and then swung his sword with both hands. It was like the sky was being split apart beneath his sword. Hiss! A ray of blood-red light descended. Bang! The Colossus aura was instantly slashed apart, but Yang Ye's sword energy wasn't even able to break through its defenses at all. Conversely, the Colossus slammed through his sword energy and arrived before him. Yang Yi frowned at the sight of this and was about to get serious. However, Snowy suddenly clapped her paws together, and then Yang Yi saw a familiar figure. Oxy. Oxy appeared before them, and then it slammed its fist down. Bang! The sky shook violently, and Oxy was blasted away. As for the Colossus, it was slammed onto the swamp as well. But it only took a moment for it to charge up at Oxy again. Moreover, a powerful wave of pressure surged out from the Colossus. Yang Yi frowned when he sensed the pressure. Dragon pressure. He actually sensed dragon pressure. Meanwhile, Nanli Meng suddenly said, A primal dragon croc. A powerful creature. A very powerful creature. She gazed at Snowy and said, Didn't you say that there's no danger here? Snowy blinked, and then she pointed at the primal dragon croc that was fighting Oxy. She was clearly asking Nanli Meng if that was even considered as dangerous. The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched. Was it dangerous? Demons like these were truly of no threat to Snowy. As for why it hadn't sensed Snowy's presence, it was because Yang Yi had hidden her and himself with the sword domain. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts and gazed at the primal dragon croc. Could Snowy make that big fellow join them? That primal dragon croc was at the limit breaker realm at the very least. If they could recruit it, it would be a huge help to them. However, he was a little hesitant. These primal creatures were very strong and were usually unwilling to submit. Oxy and the primal true dragon had only submitted because they were considered to be young, so they were innately afraid of Snowy, or it should be said that they wanted to curry favor with Snowy. However, the primal dragon croc wasn't mentally a child. He could see ferocity, viciousness, and the desire to kill within its eyes. Oxy was clearly no match for it, and Oxy was being suppressed by it and had suffered many blows. Snowy blinked when she noticed this, and then she withdrew an ethereal axe. She was about to fight herself. However, she seemed to have thought of something and gazed at Xianxia. She knew the limits of her own strength. She was really not skilled at fighting. Xianxia smiled and was about to attack. However, Arya suddenly appeared beside Xianxia. She stopped him and gazed at Oxy. Don't. It's about to evolve. No, advance. Advance? Suddenly, Oxy howled with fury. In an instant, it grew dozens of times larger. At this moment, it was much larger than the primal dragon croc. At the same time, a powerful aura swept out of Oxy, and space rippled before it. Xianxia was stunned. The World Lord Realm? Oxy actually attained the World Lord Realm? Suddenly, Oxy gazed at Snowy and stretched out its hand. Snowy blinked, and then she understood what it meant. She immediately tossed the axe in her grasp at Oxy. As soon as it entered Oxy's grasp, the axe grew dozens of times larger. Xianxia and Nanli Meng's faces changed at the sight of this. Xianxia felt that a swing of Oxy's axe could chop open the world. Favorite at this moment, Oxy's body had grown almost 300 m tall, and he stood there like a mountain with a huge axe in his grasp. The primordial axe of creation. After Oxy attained the World Lord Realm, and its aura was terrifyingly strong too. But after it held the axe in its grasp, its aura was absolutely terrifying. The primal dragon croc's gaze was unprecedentedly solemn. At this moment it felt threatened. Suddenly, Oxy raised the primordial axe of creation and chopped down at it. A huge pitch-black spatial rift appeared in the sky. It had been chopped open by the primordial axe of creation. The rift seemed like a shocking hole in the sky. The seriousness in the primal dragon croc's eyes grew even denser. It didn't dare act carelessly. It spun rapidly in midair, and its long dragon tail swept at Oxy and the axe. The entire sky rippled before it. It was a true limit-breaker realm demon. Xianxia and Nanli Meng watched as the axe slammed against the tail. Bang! The primal dragon croc was slammed down to the swamp. In the end, it smashed into the swamp and made the swamp water surge up from the impact. Snowy's eyes lit up from the sight of this. Meanwhile, Xianxia and Nanli Meng exchanged glances, and there was a trace of solemnness in their eyes. Oxy's strength was a little terrifying. Oxy excelled in physical strength, and coupled with the primordial axe of creation, it could be said to be a union of strength. As for the primal dragon croc, even if Oxy had risen to a higher realm of cultivation, Oxy was still no match for the primal dragon croc in a pure collision of strength. It should be said that Oxy's bloodline couldn't compare to it. While bloodline couldn't decide everything, it was extremely important. Yet now, Oxy had a divine treasure while the primal dragon croc didn't. Demons competed with equipment too. Oxy returned to its original form. It walked over to Snowy and passed the axe to Snowy. Snowy took it, grinned, and then patted Oxy on the shoulder. Could be considered as praising Oxy. Meanwhile, Arya was still licking her tonghulu, and then she passed it to Snowy. Xianxia moved his gaze away from Oxy and looked at the swamp below. At this moment, it had returned to normal, and the primal dragon croc didn't show any further signs of movement. Xianxia gazed at the swamp and seemed to be lost in thought. Meanwhile, Snowy inhaled lightly. In an instant, the spirit energy within the swamp surged, and then it surged towards Snowy like a torrent. Nanli Meng glanced at Snowy with slight fear in her eyes. Snowy was extracting the spirit energy here, and she was doing it like she was taking water from it. Bang! A colossus shot up from within the swamp. It was the primal dragon croc. It stared at Xianxia's group with a vicious glow in its eyes. After all, taking the spirit energy here was like taking its life. Meanwhile, Snowy passed the axe to Oxy. The primal dragon croc's vicious gaze turned to a fearful one from the sight of this. and then it gazed at Snowy. At this moment, Xianxia had stopped concealing Snowy's aura with the sword domain. The primal dragon croc was stunned by the sight of Snowy, and then disbelief appeared in its eyes. A sprite? Impossible. Xianxia glanced at it. Obviously, it had recognized Snowy. Snowy was about to wave her claw when Xianxia shook his head and walked away with her. The primal dragon croc was stunned and wanted to chase after them. However, Oxy obstructed its path, and Oxy was holding the primordial axe of creation. Oxy's face was calm, but its aura was extremely powerful. Arya walked over to Oxy and stretched out her hand. Oxy obediently passed her the axe, and the latter nodded as she gazed at it. A good axe indeed! Oxy was at a loss for words. Arya licked her tongue hulu and gazed at the crocodile. Madman Big Brother Yang asked me to tell you that if you're willing to go with him, then he'll take you out of this battlefield. He'll even give you a mountain at the rear mountains of the Sword Sect. It'll be a huge mountain too. The primal dragon croc glanced at Xianxia's vanishing figure and spoke with disdain. Follow him? An ant at the true void realm? He isn't worthy. Arya suddenly stopped licking her tongue hulu and gazed at the crocodile. She pointed the axe at it and said, Big guy, if you let Snowy hear that, you're dead. You're absolutely dead. She gazed at Oxy and asked, Oxy, I'm not lying, right? Oxy hurriedly nodded. Oxy wasn't trying to curry favor with Arya. It was because they really couldn't afford to offend Xianxia. Both Arya and Snowy, such lawless little fellows, would immediately become obedient when Xianxia was serious. The primal dragon croc spoke with disdain. I can crush him like an ant. Arya shook her head and passed the axe to Oxy. Let's go. This big guy's an idiot. Oxy glanced at the crocodile and nodded to display its agreement. The spirit energy in the primordial pagoda was much, much better than this place. Wait! Suddenly, the primal dragon croc spoke. Was that a sprite progenitor? Oxy glanced at Arya, and the latter didn't turn around. So, it naturally didn't turn around and they just walked off. It had been ignored. This infuriated the primal dragon croc, and viciousness surged into its eyes while a wave of powerful pressure swept out from it. Suddenly, Arya stopped. She put the tonghulu in her mouth and took the axe from Oxy, and then she hurled it at the crocodile. Hiss! It tore through the air. The crocodile's expression changed drastically, and it swept its long tail at the axe. Bang! As soon as they collided, the crocodile was blasted over 3 kilometers away, and countless scales cracked open on its tail. Besides that, the axe was still on its tail. The axe had cut into its flesh. The primal dragon croc gazed at her with astonishment. You? Arya licked her tonghulu and said, Give the axe back to me. The crocodile was furious when it heard this, and its desire to kill seemed simply material. Suddenly, Arya licked her tonghulu and said, Why must a lowly demon like you be so arrogant? How dare you? It howled furiously, and then it charged at her. It was like a towering mountain pressing down upon her. Oxy's expression changed as it clenched its fist tightly. It was about to attack when Arya suddenly pulled Oxy behind her, and then she gazed at the charging crocodile. Suddenly, a strange smile arose on her face, and then she licked her lips before opening her mouth. Time froze. Oxy watched as the crocodile started to shrink, and it grew smaller as it grew closer to Arya. There was despair in its eyes. Besides despair, there was terror. Bloodline suppression. Actually, at its level of strength, besides the bloodline of its ancestors, even the bloodline of a primal true dragon couldn't suppress it. At the very most, a primal true dragon could deter and pressure it, but at this moment, its bloodline was being completely and utterly suppressed. The strength and ability of demon beasts actually came from their bloodline, but at this moment its bloodline was being suppressed, so it was rendered helpless. The primal dragon croc was still growing smaller, and it was the size of a tonghulu when it arrived before Arya. Arya inhaled lightly and sucked it into her mouth. She burped, and her stomach seemed to bulge a little, but it only took a moment for her to return to normal. She patted her stomach, and then a moment passed before she spat out an axe. The primordial axe of creation. Oxy was stunned by this. It had been eaten. The primal dragon croc had been eaten by Area. Oxy was quite nervous. Meanwhile, she passed the axe to Oxy, and the latter took it with slightly trembling hands. Area patted Oxy on the shoulder. "Let's go!" She pranced off into the distance. Oxy wiped off the sweat on its face and hurriedly followed after her. 2 hours later, Xianxia's group left the swamp, and there was a pure white pearl in his grasp. It was the inner core of the primal dragon croc. Area had given it to him because she said it was useful for him. The primal dragon croc was dead. Xianxia didn't ask how it died, because Area would just brush his question off, and Oxy would lower its head as if it was begging him not to ask it. Xianxia didn't pursue an answer. He wanted help, but it was too vicious. He didn't like demon beasts like that, and he didn't like such demon beasts staying by Snowy's side. Actually, it could have lived, and Xianxia had never thought of killing it. Unfortunately, it didn't know how to act and challenged Area. Suddenly, Nanli Meng stopped. Xianxia was dragged back from his thoughts as well. He looked into the distance, and then his expression changed drastically while both he and Nanli Meng couldn't help but move backwards swiftly. A corpse was floating not too far ahead of them. It was the corpse of a man, and he seemed around the age of 30. He wore a white robe and had a spear stabbed through his chest. Besides that, a soul was floating by the corpse. It was the man's soul. His body and soul had been separated. At this moment, the soul was looking at Xianxia and Nanli Meng with a trace of surprise but even more bewilderment in its eyes. As for Snowy, Area, and Oxy, he'd sent them into the primordial pagoda. Meanwhile, the soul suddenly asked, "Did you see that old man?" Xianxia asked, "Old man?" The man said, "The old man with a bamboo chest on his back." Xianxia nodded. "I did." The man replied, "I did too." Xianxia glanced at him. "What a coincidence." The man shook his head slightly. "Leave. This isn't a place you should be." Xianxia hesitated for a moment and asked, "Is it very dangerous?" The man nodded. "It's dangerous to you." Xianxia was at a loss for words. Meanwhile, the man suddenly asked, "How's the outside world?" Xianxia replied, "Which one are you talking about?" The man said, "The eternal universe." Xianxia and Nanli Meng exchanged glances. In the end, Xianxia said, "I don't know. Most people aren't able to get there." The man closed his eyes slowly. A long time passed before he glanced at the surroundings and said, "This battlefield is huge, extremely huge, and many died here. Not just humans, there are other living beings too. Many existences did not vanish after their death. Just like me. There are some whose resentment still lingers. Besides that, some even survived completely. Perhaps these survivors were very weak in the past, but none are weak now." Nanli Meng suddenly asked, "Why don't they go outside?" "Outside?" The man shook his head. "The outside world isn't as safe as this place." He pointed behind himself and said, "There's a forest over there. A powerful figure fell there, so you can try your luck over there. But don't go beyond the forest. Your strength isn't sufficient to go there." The man closed his eyes once he finished speaking. Meanwhile, Nanli Meng suddenly said, "Can you reveal what happened during the primal era? For example, information about that battle." The man glanced at her. "It's meaningless, isn't it?" She smiled. "I'm just quite curious." The man fell silent for a short while and said, "When it comes to cultivation, humans, demons, and all others cultivate. But what's most important when you cultivate? Resources. The longer you live, the more indifferent you get toward things. And as time passes, you're the only person left in your world. So, for the sake of even better resources, they are able to stop at nothing. However, it is impossible to avoid. If you don't fight for it, you'll die. So, there is no good or bad in this cruel world. There is only strong and weak." He gazed at them and continued, "That battle caused the fall of an era. As for the secrets of it, finding out will not do you any good." Nanli Meng wished to ask more, but Xianxia shook his head at her. He gazed at the man, hesitated for a moment and said, "Senior, your body is here, and your soul is complete. Why don't you enter your body? The man pointed at the spear in his body. If I hadn't reacted swiftly and left it in the form of my soul, I would have died the moment that spear stabbed me. As for why I don't enter my body again, it's because that spear is suppressing my body. Then just pull it out, said Xianxia. He regretted his words as soon as he said that. It was quite stupid, because if it was possible, the man would have done so by now. The man suddenly chuckled. I've been waiting here for thousands of years, and I've only met two capable of pulling out this spear. The first was a sword cultivator who arrived here not too long ago. He glanced at me and went to the forest. As for the second, it was the old man with the bamboo chest. He was willing to help, but I couldn't accept his conditions, so he refused. A sword cultivator? Xianxia suddenly asked. Was he wearing a cloud-white robe? The man nodded. You know him? Xianxia nodded slightly. Sort of. The man spoke softly. He's very strong. Suddenly, Snowy emerged from Xianxia's chest. The man was stunned when he saw her. Obviously, he'd recognized Snowy. Meanwhile, Snowy's gaze fell on the spear in the man's corpse. It was quite strange. Completely pitch black and extremely smooth like a mirror. Besides that, its tip was around 2 times longer than an ordinary spear. Snowy's eyes lit up from the sight of it, and then she went over and wrapped her arms around it. After that, she pulled it out. However, the spear was very long while her arms were quite short, so it was quite difficult for her to hold it. Thus, she patted it lightly, and the spear seemed to understand what she wanted. It instantly shrunk to a size she could hold. Xianxia was stunned speechless. Nanli Meng glanced at Snowy with a strange expression on her face. Meanwhile, the man's hands trembled slightly, but the man's face was very calm. Snowy went over to Xianxia with the spear, cracked a smile at him, and then passed it to him. Xianxia glanced at the spear and took it, but he noticed to his shock that he couldn't move it. He couldn't move it at all. Xianxia was quite shocked. How strong was he right now? But he couldn't move the spear? Meanwhile, the man suddenly said, It's normal. Even I can't move that spear. Xianxia gazed at the man, and the latter explained, It has a spirit of its own, and only someone it acknowledges can move it. He gazed at Snowy and continued, Of course, she's an exception. Even this spear has to give a sprite progenitor face. Give Snowy face. Xianxia suddenly thought of something, and he joked, Senior, how much face would things give her? How much? The man glanced at Xianxia and smiled. A lot. It has been like that for all the sprite progenitors. Xianxia smiled and didn't ask more. He rubbed Snowy's head and said, Senior, your soul confused with your body now, right? The man nodded and said, Young brother, what is your name? Xianxia smiled. Xianxia. The man said, I'm Nan Yu, the master of the myriad immortal sect. Of course, my sect doesn't exist anymore. He glanced at Snowy and continued, I'll remember this debt I owe you. Xianxia smiled. It was nothing, right? Can you leave this place now? The man shook his head. I have to repair my body, and then merge my soul with it. Xianxia nodded. Then I won't disturb you further. The man said, Don't forget that you must never cross that forest. It's a forbidden area. Xianxia nodded. Thanks for the reminder. He took Snowy in his arms and walked off. Nanli Meng glanced at the man and followed Xianxia. Nanyu glanced at Xianxia and Nanli Meng's figures, and then he moved his gaze away. It shouldn't be. There was slight hesitance in his eyes. A long time passed before he restrained his thoughts and gazed at the body before him. I hope it still works. Meanwhile, there was cold sweat on Xianxia's forehead. Nanli Meng had a solemn expression on her face too. Both of them stopped. Nanli Meng spoke solemnly. He's a 3-world realm at least, and he may even be at the 4-world realm. Moreover, he may have been even stronger at his prime. Xianxia spoke solemnly. He wanted to kill us just now. Nanli Meng nodded. He wanted to kill you. Xianxia gazed at her. He gave up because of Snowy? She shook her head. I'm not sure. But no matter why, he has used a different method. And it's to become friends with you. Yang Yi nodded slightly and glanced at the surroundings. This place was much more dangerous than the outside world. Nanli Meng suddenly asked, "Are you afraid?" Yang Yi shook his head. "He asked us not to go past the forest. Do you think he told us that out of good intentions?" Nanli Meng nodded. "Since he chose to be friends with you, then he won't harm you. Otherwise, even if he were just a soul, his strength is still sufficient to kill you. What about you?" Yang Yi gazed at her. "Can't he kill you?" Nanli Meng revealed a sly smile. "What do you think?" Yang Yi shook his head. "Forget it. Let's go take a look at the forest." He sped up toward the distance. Nanli Meng glanced at the man from before, and then she followed him. It didn't take long for them to arrive at the forest. It was huge, and every tree within it was extremely tall, even taller than a mountain. So, standing in the forest made them feel tiny. Ancient trees blotted out the sky around them. There was no gain without risk. As far as Yang Yi was concerned, some danger was worth the risk. Since the ancient times, which expert had received fortuitous encounters that just fell out of the sky. Fortune would never come to you. Of course, Snowy was an exception. Fortune may come to that little fellow. According to Nan Yu, a great expert of the primal era perished in the forest. But what kind of expert was it? Yang Yi couldn't help but feel quite curious. Suddenly, Nanjing stopped. A short while later, she withdrew a leaf, and Yang Ye's expression changed drastically. "You!" She'd vanished completely before he could finish speaking. Meanwhile, Yang Yi seemed to have sensed something, and a chill ran down his spine. Yang Yi turned to look, and he saw a woman there. She wore a white morning dress and had a memorial tablet in her hands. There were only 2 words on the tablet, "Late husband." She just gazed calmly at him, but Yang Yi felt a chill run down his spine. However, Yang Yi remained very calm. He'd experienced many things in life, so while this situation was very dangerous, it wasn't enough to make him panic. Yang Yi steadied himself, glanced at her, and then walked forward slowly. The sword precursor was in his grasp. A blood-red sword. Suddenly, she appeared in front of Yang Yi. She was very close to him, less than 2 meters away. Yang Yi could see her even more clearly now. She was quite beautiful, but her face was pale, and she emanated a ghastly aura. To be a little blunt, she didn't seem normal at all. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and asked, "Senior, do you need something?" She took a step forward and looked Yang Yi in the eyes. "Can you get something for me outside this forest?" "Outside the forest?" Yang Yi pointed at the direction he came from. "That way." She shook her head and pointed in the opposite direction. "That way." Yang Ye's expression changed. It was where Nan Yu had told him not to go. Yang Yi hesitated for a moment and said, "It's dangerous, very dangerous." She spoke indifferently. "Is it not dangerous now?" Yang Ye's eyes narrowed slightly, and then he swung his sword at her. The sword domain. 3 swings. He took the initiative to gain the upper hand. His current limit was 3 wings, and the might of it was weaker than 2 World Realm experts but stronger than 1 World Realm experts. As for 4 swings, it was around the strength of a 2 World Realm expert. But at this moment, he didn't dare to use it unless he had no other choice. The might of 3 swings was sufficient to obliterate the world. However, it stopped half an inch away from her head. A strand of hair had coiled around his sword. It was her hair. Yang Ye's sword seemed like it had been frozen in place by the hair, and it couldn't move at all. She didn't say anything and just gazed at him. Yang Yi thought for a moment and said, "Senior, your strength is extraordinary. I was shocked by your strength when I saw you, so I wanted to see guidance from you. Sai, I'm too weak. Thank you for your guidance." She looked him in the eye. "Will you go or not?" Yang Yi spoke bitterly. "Senior, you're so strong, yet even you dare not go. So, wouldn't I just be giving my life away?" She shook her head. "Since you were able to get here, it proves you're not ordinary. Perhaps you'll survive." Yang Yi replied, "What if I die?" She gazed at him. "Then you can die a little later. Otherwise, you'll die now. Choose." Yang Yi was at a loss for words. She released his sword, but she was still staring at him. Yang Yi closed his eyes slowly. How were his chances if he fought her head-on? The answer was that he had no chance at all. Since she could stop that attack of his with such ease, she was at least a 2-world or even 3-world realm expert. Suddenly, she said, "It comes with benefits." Benefits? Yang Yi gazed at her, and she explained indifferently, "If you can help me, I'll reward you." Yang Yi glanced at the surroundings and said, "Senior, I came with a woman. Her strength is much greater than mine. Why don't you ask her?" Loyalty? He didn't care about that where Nanli Meng was concerned. She'd repeatedly concealed herself when there was danger and left him to fend for himself. The woman glanced behind Yang Yi and said, "You're weak and easy to bully." Yang Yi was stunned speechless. "Ha ha!" Suddenly, roaring laughter resounded from behind Yang Yi. Obviously, it was Nanli Meng. She walked over to Yang Yi and smiled at him. "Angry?" Yang Yi replied indifferently, "There's nothing to be angry about. She makes absolute sense. It's my fault for being weak." Nanli Meng smiled. "You have a good mentality." As she spoke, she gazed at the woman before Yang Yi. "What do you want him to do over there? Why don't you tell us about it?" The woman glanced at Nanli Meng. "You're very confident to dare to show yourself before me." Nanli Meng chuckled and pointed at Yang Yi. "I should tell you that he has a very, very formidable sister. While she isn't here, she'll definitely avenge him if you kill him. At that time, you'll be in great trouble." The woman walked over to Nanli Meng and looked her in the eyes. "Are you threatening me?" Nanli Meng smiled. "I was just joking. But do you want to spar a little first?" The woman's hair suddenly floated up before Nanli Meng, and the latter clenched her fists slowly. In an instant, dark clouds covered the forest and lightning converged throughout the forest. The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. "Spells. I never expected someone outside to possess such spells." Her voice had a trace of seriousness, and she wasn't as calm and carefree as she had been. Nanli Meng smiled. "In my opinion, we can help, but you must repay us, and it has to be sufficient payment." The woman gazed at Nanli Meng for a long time, and then she turned around slowly and gazed into the depths of the forest. "There's a desolate plain over there, and a primal emperor is buried there. My husband was one of the primal emperor's followers, and he died there too. I want his corpse. If you can get his corpse for me?" She flipped her palm, and a black seal floated there. Meanwhile, Snowy wanted to come outside, but Yang Yi stopped her. It was best to be cautious and hide Snowy from the eyes of outsiders. In the primordial pagoda, Snowy looked up into the sky with a pitiable glow in her eyes. Actually, she was looking at the black seal above the woman's palm. Wang, Arya, and Oxy were by Snowy's side. Oxy stood silently behind Arya and Snowy. Arya licked her Tonghulu and passed it to Snowy. "That thing isn't bad. Tell Big Brother Yang to take it." Snowy licked the Tonghulu and nodded to display her agreement. However, Arya suddenly added, "She's very strong. He's probably no match for her." Snowy didn't pay those words any attention. Meanwhile, Yang Yi gazed at the black seal and asked, "What's that?" She glanced at him. "The seal of suppression. It can suppress a person's realm of cultivation." "Suppress cultivation?" Yang Yi was stunned. "What do you mean?" "She means that you can use it to suppress someone's cultivation." Nanli Meng suddenly explained. "If you're in battle with someone and that person is a 2-world realm expert, then you can use it to suppress that person into a 1-world realm expert." "Understand?" Yang Ye's eyes immediately burned slightly with desire. Suppression of cultivation. If he obtained it, then he wouldn't have to fear 2-world realm experts anymore. Even if he encountered a 3-world realm expert, he could use it to drag that expert down to the 2-world realm. Simply speaking, he could reduce his enemy's strength. It was a treasure. Yang Ye's eyes burned with desire. Meanwhile, the woman put the seal away. Nanli Meng suddenly asked, "What kind of dangers await over there?" The woman closed her eyes slowly. "The words of an emperor." Nanli Meng frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" She explained. "That primal emperor didn't want to be disturbed when he died, and those words filled that desolate plain with a mysterious force. No living being is able to enter that place. Yang Yi was astounded. Just some words are that strong? The woman glanced at Yang Yi. Weakness limits your imagination. Yang Ye's face was completely dark. Can she just not try to strike a blow to my confidence? Meanwhile, Nanli Meng suddenly asked, Even you can't get close to it? The woman nodded slightly. I can't. Nanli Meng asked, Then why do you think he can? The woman glanced at Yang Yi. Perhaps he'll be lucky? Nanli Meng was at a loss for words. The corners of Yang Ye's mouth twitched. If it wasn't for the fact that he was really no match for her. He really wanted to press her against the ground and sand her face off. Meanwhile, Nanli Meng gazed at Yang Yi. Let's go. Yang Yi gazed at her with astonishment. We're really going? Do you have a choice? She glared at him and then pulled him away. The woman glanced at Yang Yi and Nanli Meng, and then she looked down at the memorial tablet in her grasp. Honey, I don't have much time left. Meanwhile, Yang Yi gazed at Nanli Meng. Why did you really come to this battlefield? Nanli Meng glanced at Yang Yi. An emperor. Do you know what a primal emperor is? Is a true expert, a real expert. Don't you want to see one for yourself? She ignored Yang Yi and sped up. Yang Yi noticed that there was excitement in her eyes and a wisp of madness. Yang Yi fell silent on the spot for a short while, and then he followed her. Not long after they left, a sword cultivator in a cloud-white robe arrived in the forest. He'd come from the desolate plains, but he just happened to miss Yang Yi and Nanli Meng. The sword cultivator encountered the woman with the memorial tablet, and she was looking at him too. The woman suddenly said, Another sword cultivator was just here. The sword cultivator nodded slightly. I sensed his aura. She said, He's much, much weaker than you. The sword cultivator shook his head. You're wrong. The woman asked while sounding quite unconvinced. What do you mean? The sword cultivator glanced in the direction Yang Yi and Nanli Meng had left toward, and then he said, The more ties he has, the stronger he will be. He moved his gaze away and looked at the woman again. Once I severed my final ties, I've never lost throughout my path, but I lost to him once. Impossible. The woman spoke loudly. I can kill him with ease, but I can't resist a single swing of your sword. The sword cultivator shook his head. You're too weak to understand. Once he finished speaking, he walked off into the distance, but he'd only walked a few steps when he stopped once more. He turned around and asked, Can you tell me where's the most dangerous place here? Where's the most dangerous? She gazed at the sword cultivator for a long time before pointing to the left. The central area of the battlefield is in that direction. The sword cultivator nodded slightly and left in that direction. Meanwhile, she suddenly asked, What's so special about him? Geniuses? Monstrous geniuses? She'd seen too many of them. Yang Ye's natural talent and strength were not bad indeed, but just that little bit was nothing to her. After all, monstrous geniuses were everywhere during her time. The sword cultivator didn't stop. In my heart, a person's strength isn't judged by their combat strength. A farmer can hold his ground against 100 demons that far surpass him in strength just to protect his child and wife. That's someone strong to me. He suddenly stopped at this point. In the world I came from, I met someone, and he was willing to get entangled with me over countless worlds just for his loved ones. Actually, he could have gone further if he wanted, but he didn't. The woman asked, Why? The sword cultivator replied softly, Because of love. Is it pedantic? Foolish? No, it's the true emotion of a true man. At this point, he gazed at her. You too. He didn't say more and vanished into the forest. The woman held the memorial tablet in silence. She'd attacked this sword cultivator before her when he'd first arrived at the forest, but she'd been defeated by a single move. An expert? As far as she was concerned, he was a true expert. But as far as he was concerned, that was not what being strong represented. When there was a difference in strength and cultivation, one's views would naturally be different too. She restrained her thoughts and looked in the direction that Yang Yi and Nanli Meng had left toward. As she gazed at it, her gaze gradually turned blank. Yang Yi and Nanli Meng left the forest, and not long after, they saw the desolate plains. It was an endless plain. See that? Nanli Meng pointed at the desolate plain. A primal emperor perished here in the past. Yang Yi glanced at her. Why are you so excited? She gazed at Yang Yi. Excited? Do you know what a primal emperor is? An overlord of the ages. A true overlord. She hurriedly withdrew her thick scroll, unfurled it, and wrote, The desolate plains, a primal emperor fell here. Yang Yi had a weird expression on his face. Is there something wrong with her? They continued forward, and it didn't take long for them to step foot into the desolate plains. However, they noticed an invisible force obstructing their path. Pressure. It was like a mountain floating above them. At this moment, Yang Yi had a feeling that if he continued forward, he would be obliterated by the pressure. They exchanged glances, and then Nanli Meng said, It's the Emperor's will. See that? He died so long ago, but his will is able to suppress countless experts. Yang Yi looked up at the end of the desolate plains, and he was extremely shocked. Will? The Emperor had relied just on his will to cause such huge pressure to the experts of the later generations. If he was still alive, how terrifying would his strength be? Weakness limited his imagination. Those words did make sense. Yang Yi shook his head and smiled, and then he walked forward. As soon as he took the first step, a wave of powerful pressure slammed down upon him. In an instant, Yang Ye's figure bent down, and his knees almost hit the ground. It was absolutely powerful. A wisp of madness arose on Yang Ye's face. Suppress him with just will? Boom! A powerful wave of sword intent swept out from Yang Yi. But it only took a moment for it to be obliterated while Yang Yi was pushed all the way out of the plains. Nanli Meng frowned. Once he stopped himself, Yang Yi looked up at the desolate plains before him. Is the will of an emperor that strong? Yang Yi naturally wouldn't just give up. So he walked forward again. But as soon as he entered the area, he couldn't take another step forward. The will pressed down upon him like countless mountains. Going forward forcefully would lead to death. Nanli Meng gazed at Yang Yi and remained silent. She was waiting for Yang Yi to decide. She didn't wait long before Yang Yi started walking again. Yang Yi took a step forward. In an instant, his body became tense. Moreover, a strand of faint dragon pressure dispersed from him. Because he'd swallowed the dragon ball, he had dragon pressure. However, it wasn't much. As for why, it was because he hadn't truly unearthed its potential. Of course, it was absolutely weak before the will of the primal emperor. Nanli Meng gazed at Yang Yi in silence. Yang Yi finally took a step forward, and it was like moving a mountain. But he couldn't lift his foot again after taking that step. Yang Yi left the desolate plains, and he gazed at it in silence. Nanli Meng didn't disturb him. She looked into the distance, and no one knew what she was thinking. A long time passed before Yang Yi suddenly took a step forward, and he smiled once he did that. Nanli Meng smiled too. This time, Yang Yi hadn't used any form of energy. No profound energy, no physical strength, and no sword intent. He'd retracted all his energy. An ordinary person. He was like an ordinary person right now. While it was still very strenuous, it wasn't as difficult as before. Yang Yi gazed at Nanli Meng, and the latter smiled. In this place, the stronger you are, the greater the suppression you will face. Simple speaking, this primal emperor left this will behind as a test. Of course, it's to keep away people with ill intent too. However, I think it was mainly left here as a test. What kind of test? It's a test of will, of course. A person's will isn't linked to the person's strength, and a person's will can only be truly tested once all forms of energy are abandoned. She gazed at the plains and continued, Come on! Whether we're able to meet that emperor will depend on our own willpower. She walked forward once she finished speaking. Yang Yi glanced at Nanli Meng. Obviously, she knew the secrets of this place, and the woman with the memorial tablet was probably aware as well. However, her willpower may have been insufficient, so she hadn't been able to go far enough. But both of them refused to tell him. Moreover, His intuition told him that if he wasn't able to discover the secrets of this place, she would have never told him. Fortune. It had to be obtained by one's own efforts. Yang Yi restrained his thoughts and hurried after her. In the desolate plain, they started off quite quickly, but they gradually slowed down. Pressure. The pressure was still there, but it was different now. It didn't press down on their bodies, it pressed down on their will. It was pressure that struck their will. Nanli Meng's face was calm as she walked slowly by Yang Ye's side. Nanli Meng suddenly said, "What do you think is most important in the path of cultivation?" Yang Yi thought for a moment and said, "Natural talent, resources, mentality, and will." She asked, "Which one of them is the most important?" Yang Yi glanced at her. "I think none of them are important." She gazed at him, and he spoke indifferently. "I think the right birth is most important." She was stunned, and then she roared with laughter. She laughed for quite some time before she pointed at him. "That's not wrong at all. The right birth is very important." Ha ha! A short while later, she gazed ahead. Natural talent, resources, mentality, and will are actually all important. However, the most important is mentality and will. If a person doesn't have sufficient natural talent but possesses good mentality and strong will, then that person won't be ordinary in the end. But if the person's mentality is bad and has insufficient will, that person may be mediocre in the end. It's mostly your will and mentality that allowed you to get this far. As for your natural talent, it can't be described as being really trash, but it's absolutely not good. Yang Yi asked, "What are you trying to say?" Nanli Meng smiled. "I'm trying to say that we may be lucky. The Primal Emperor definitely didn't leave this will here for no reason. He definitely plans to leave behind his inheritance or something else. So, if we get to him, we'll get it." Yang Yi replied indifferently, "Perhaps he wants to seize a new body? He left a strand of his soul behind to wait for someone fated to have their body taken by him. He'd encountered that on many occasions." Nanli Meng chuckled. "Then we have bad luck." Yang Yi shook his head and didn't speak further. They continued forward, and it grew more and more strenuous. However, they still didn't stop. A long time passed before they saw some corpses. However, they didn't see the woman's husband. Meanwhile, both of them found it quite difficult to continue forward. Around an hour later, they suddenly stopped because the pressure had vanished. They heaved sighs of relief. Yang Yi suddenly looked up, and a middle-aged man was standing there. His hands were behind his back, and he was looking up into the sky, but his eyes were dim. There was a bloody hole on his chest, and a pitch-black spear was stabbed into the ground a short distance away from him. This spear was exactly like the spear which had been in Nan Yu's body earlier. Yang Yi and Nanli Meng exchanged glances. Obviously, the middle-aged man was the Primal Emperor. Dead. The middle-aged man was dead, and it was the black spear that had killed him. Who was its owner? Yang Yi and Nanli Meng walked over, and they gazed at the corpse in silence. An emperor. A primal emperor. The middle-aged man's strength was absolutely not something a limit-breaker realm expert could compare to, but such an expert had still been killed. How strong would one need to be in order to become truly invincible? The path of cultivation had no end. Meanwhile, Nanli Meng bowed slightly to the middle-aged man. "Senior, do you have any unfulfilled wishes?" As soon as she finished speaking, the corpse before them shook. It was moving. Yang Yi and Nanli Meng were shocked, and they immediately became extremely vigilant. The middle-aged man's eyes gradually recovered their color, and then they were no different than the eyes of an ordinary person. He withdrew his gaze and looked at them, sizing them up for a while before his gaze finally descended upon Yang Yi. The middle-aged man asked, "A sword cultivator?" Yang Yi nodded. The middle-aged man nodded slightly and pointed to the north. "There's an old friend of mine over there, and he's a sword cultivator too. Unfortunately, his sword Dao isn't suitable for you. Otherwise, you can go try your luck over there." Yang Yi smiled and wasn't disappointed. The sword Dao. He has his own sword Dao, so he could only learn from the strengths of others. The middle-aged man suddenly asked, "How's the outside world?" Nanli Meng hesitated for a moment and asked, "Senior, Are you asking about the eternal universe? He nodded slightly. Have they fulfilled their promise? Nanli Meng asked. What promise? He frowned slightly. Can the people of Eternal Border go to the eternal universe? Nanli Meng shook her head. A wisp of self-ridicule arose on the corners of his mouth. To think I still held some hope. She glanced at him and said, Senior, what happened during that battle all those years ago? The middle-aged man shook his head slightly. It's meaningless now. Not at all. Nanli Meng looked him in the eyes. At the very least, we of the later generations have the right to know, don't we? There are no records of what happened in Eternal Border. The Primal Era is a blank piece of history to the people of Eternal Border right now. The middle-aged man fell silent for a long time and said, Actually, Eternal Border is a battlefield. Nanli Meng's pupils constricted. It's a battlefield? The middle-aged man nodded. It's a huge battlefield. The Eternal Universe is the largest, but the smallest too. The Eternal Universe is like a kingdom. It's the leader of countless other universes, and it's the most flourishing universe among them. The resources it possesses are the best too. So, they grew increasingly better while the other universes, including Eternal Border, were unable to keep up. For the sake of conserving Eternal Kingdom's resources, right, they gave themselves that name. For the sake of conserving Eternal Kingdom's resources, they severed their ties to all other universes. Simply speaking, they refused to allow the people of other universes to enter Eternal Kingdom. Xianxia and Nanli Meng exchanged glances, and there was shock in both their eyes. The middle-aged man looked up at the sky, and his gaze pierced through it until he could see a river and a wall. He withdrew his gaze, shook his head, and smiled. They didn't go too far. Of course, they dare not do that. While the other universes can't compare to them, it doesn't represent that the other universes do not have any extraordinary experts. Nanli Meng spoke solemnly. Even if such experts appear, the existence of an opportunity will stop them from fighting the eternal universe until the end. As for the others, they do not have such strength. So even if they want to fight the eternal universe, it'll be no different than courting death. Indeed, he gazed at Nanli Meng and smiled. In the beginning, many saw that opportunity as a form of kindness, and so they didn't fight back. Unfortunately, not everyone saw it as a form of kindness. He looked into the sky and continued, There's a race far away from here, the desolate race. They started a war, and they crushed everything before them and attacked Eternal Kingdom. They practically succeeded. Unfortunately, they made a mistake, a huge mistake. Xianxia suddenly asked, What mistake? The middle-aged man spoke softly. They slaughtered without end upon entering Eternal Kingdom, and they killed too many living beings. These included many, many sprites, and that infuriated the sprite progenitor of Eternal Kingdom. So, the sprite progenitor that never participated in conflicts suddenly declared war on the desolate race. The sprite progenitor personally left Eternal Kingdom and summoned the help of countless sprites. Moreover, the spirit veins and some great demons of the desolate race switched sides. He closed his eyes slowly at this point. I'll never forget that scene. The sprite progenitor's participation in the battle brought hope to Eternal Kingdom. The hope of victory. The desolate race's patriarch, the desolate emperor, joined that battle himself. However, Eternal Kingdom was prepared, and they sent around 10 emperors, over 20 great demons, and a few dozen sprite emperors to protect the sprite progenitor with their lives. Unfortunately, the strength of the desolate race's patriarch surpassed everyone's imagination. Xianxia asked, The sprite progenitor died? The middle-aged man nodded slightly. The sprite progenitor died, but the desolate race's patriarch was heavily injured. Moreover, because they killed the sprite progenitor, it infuriated the living beings of the entire universe. The spirit of all beings madly attacked the desolate race at that time, including some mysterious ancient creatures. It can be said that the desolate race who had the upper hand instantly lost their advantage. Even the impossibly strong patriarch of the desolate race couldn't stop their attack. Because even the spirit of all beings on his side was displeased with what he'd done. Coupled with the fact that he and the desolate race had suffered heavy injuries and losses, The desolate emperor had no choice but to flee with his race. The sprite progenitor. Nanli Meng glanced at Yang Yi. She hadn't forgotten that this fellow before her had a sprite progenitor. While it wasn't really a sprite progenitor yet, it was only a matter of time before the little fellow became one. Nanli Meng knew that she had to be nicer to Snowy. Actually, Yang Yi was quite excited when he heard this. A sprite progenitor was actually so terrifying. In other words, practically no one would dare to touch Snowy in the future. Yang Yi grew even more excited at the thought of this, and it should be said that he was happy for Snowy. In the past, many had targeted her. But once she became a sprite progenitor, probably no one would dare to anymore. Nanli Meng suddenly asked, "Then what happened here in Eternal Border?" The middle-aged man shook his head slightly. "This is the only way to the eternal universe. So we either had to stand with them and submit to the desolate race. In the beginning, we weren't sure which way to side. But once the desolate race offended the sprite progenitor by slaughtering too many living beings, the experts of Eternal Border immediately sided with Eternal Kingdom. While the desolate race had broken into the Eternal Kingdom, their actions were truly despicable. Moreover, the people of countless universes were very well aware that if the desolate race took over Eternal Kingdom, they would definitely do the same as Eternal Kingdom was already doing. Moreover, they may not give others any chance at all." Nanli Meng spoke softly. "Both the desolate race and Eternal Kingdom only care about themselves." The middle-aged man nodded slightly. "We had no choice but to pick a side during that battle. However, countless died after we picked sides. Of course, more than that died throughout the war. Fortunately, the sprite progenitor was benevolent, and she sent some people from Eternal Border into Eternal Kingdom before she died. Eternal Kingdom naturally didn't refuse her, and they promised to allow 10 people from Eternal Border to enter Eternal Kingdom for free every 10 years. Yang Yi thought of 2 words, giving alms. But it was normal. After all, Eternal Kingdom was too strong. As far as the people of Eternal Border were concerned, that quota of 10 was a form of kindness, great kindness. Yang Yi shook his head. Eternal Kingdom? If he were being honest, he didn't care for it at all. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man gazed at Yang Yi. "Can I see her?" Yang Yi glanced at him and summoned Snowy. At this moment, she was sleeping. From some point in time, the little fellow had become fond of sleeping. Yang Yi didn't wake her and just held her in his arms. There was a wisp of complicated emotions in the middle-aged man's eyes as he gazed at Snowy. She was just a sprite lord, yet I never expected her to be able to evolve into a sprite progenitor. It's quite inconceivable indeed. Moreover, it's outside of Eternal Kingdom. He shook his head and sighed. It's her luck and her misfortune. You must remember that you must not give her to anyone until she truly becomes a sprite progenitor. Especially Eternal Kingdom. That sprite progenitor possessed supreme status in Eternal Kingdom because she was a sprite progenitor already. So no person or power in Eternal Kingdom would act against a sprite progenitor. However, this little fellow of yours is still a sprite lord. If she falls into their hands, they will definitely use extreme methods to control her. Yang Yi nodded. I'll take good care of her. As if she'd heard him, Snowy rubbed her head against Yang Ye's chest, and then she wrapped her paws around him. Meanwhile, a slight grin was on her face. It seemed like she was dreaming of some kind of treasure, because she smiled just like that when she saw a treasure. Yang Yi rubbed her head and gazed at the middle-aged man. Senior, we're going to leave now. If you have any treasures, if you have anything you need us to help you with, then please be frank. We'll do our best. Nanli Meng's face twitched when she heard him, and she acted like she didn't know him. Treasures. Even if you wanted them, you can't be that direct, right? The middle-aged man glanced at Yang Yi and smiled, and then he flicked a mirror over to Yang Yi. Yang Yi hurriedly asked, What's this? The true energy mirror. The middle-aged man explained, It has a formation and it can reflect energy. If you use it in battle, once the energy of your opponent strikes it, all of the energy will be reflected back. Yang Yi hurriedly asked, All of it? The middle-aged man shook his head. It can reflect 70%, and if you can't deal with the remaining 30%, then it's obvious your opponent's strength far surpasses your own. 70%. Yang Yi nodded. That wasn't bad either. As if she knew what he was thinking, Nanli Meng suddenly said, "Be content with what you have. Even a three-world realm expert won't be able to defeat you now." Yang Yi thought for a moment and realized that it did make sense. If it could reflect 70%, it represented that his opponent was only fighting him with 30% of his or her strength. Yang Ye's eyes lit up when he thought of this. "Remember." Meanwhile, the middle-aged man suddenly said, "Using that formation requires a huge amount of spirit energy. Based on your current strength, you can only use it once at most." Spirit energy? Yang Yi was stunned. He was about to speak when Snowy suddenly opened her eyes. She gazed at the mirror, and her eyes immediately lit up. Snowy embraced the mirror and knocked it with her paw, causing clear and resounding clangs to come from it. Snowy blinked, and then blew on it. Countless strands of spirit energy instantly surged into it. In an instant, the mirror shook violently, and then a thin layer of light appeared around it. It was very beautiful. Snowy gazed at Yang Yi, and then she pointed at the mirror. Yang Yi smiled. "It's yours." Snowy cracked a smile and went into the primordial pagoda with it. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man spoke softly. "Looks like spirit energy isn't an issue for you." Yang Yi smiled and didn't say anything. He really didn't have to worry about spirit energy while he had Snowy with him. The middle-aged man gazed at Nanli Meng, hesitated for a moment, and then sent a ray of white light in her direction. "Within it is some information about the primal era. It should be useful to you." Nanli Meng bowed slightly to him. "Thank you." And then she put the white light away. Meanwhile, the middle-aged man added, "I left this last strand of vitality to wait for a successor. Unfortunately, after so many years, no one has come here. As for the both of you, none of you are suitable to be my successor." He flipped his palm, and a black scroll appeared there. He sent it over to Nanli Meng. "If you encounter someone who isn't bad, then give it to that person. Everything I know is in there." She hesitated for a moment and nodded. "I'll do my best." The man grinned. "Go on." Nanli Meng glanced at him, and his body had started to turn ethereal. An instant later, his body vanished. Nanli Meng and Yang Yi bowed slightly before leaving. They searched around, and it didn't take long for them to find the corpse of the woman's husband. It hadn't rotted. After all, he'd been an extraordinary expert in the past. Just like that, they brought the corpse back to the forest. In the forest, she gazed at the corpse for a long time, and then she looked at Yang Yi and flicked a black seal to him. The seal of suppression. Yang Yi didn't hesitate to take it. She said indifferently, "Leave." Yang Yi glanced at her, hesitated for a moment, and said, "Senior, the dead cannot be resurrected. I hope you can get through this and... You know nothing." Suddenly, she looked him in the eyes. "Get out now." Yang Ye's face stiffened, and then he shook his head and left. Nanli Meng glanced at her and just walked away without saying anything. Meanwhile, the woman suddenly said, "Don't go right after you leave the forest. The center of the battlefield is over there. If you encounter anything there, your strengths are probably insufficient to keep you alive." She took the corpse and walked off into the depths of the forest once she finished speaking. By a tomb deep within the forest, there were 2 names on the tomb. She placed the man's corpse into the uncovered casket. Suddenly, she gazed at his right hand, and he was holding something tightly in it. It was a strand of hair. Tears surged from her eyes when she saw the hair, and she hugged him tightly. All those years ago, high above in the clouds, he held her hand as she looked him in the eyes. "Can you not go?" He shook his head. "My brothers are all there and the monarch needs us." She really wanted to ask him to take her with him, but she couldn't, because she was very weak, and she had no right to interfere in a battle of that level. He released her and said, "Wait for me. Wait for my return." He turned around and was about to leave. Meanwhile, she grabbed his hand and placed her hair within it. She said softly, "I'll wait for you." He nodded slightly and vanished into the boundless sky. This parting was eternal. Before the tomb, she gazed at the man in the casket, and a smile curled up on her face. "We couldn't be together in life, but we can be together in death." She entered the casket, closed, and so did the tomb. Outside the forest, Xianxia spoke softly. Have you ever liked someone? Nanli glanced at him and said, Like someone? Sorry, allow me to be honest, but it's better to like a dog than to like a man. At the very least, a dog won't betray you, right? Xianxia didn't know what to say in response. She gently combed her hair behind her ears. Women can only become truly strong if they do not love anyone. Because once they fall for someone, their minds deteriorate. Moreover, the words of most men cannot be trusted. Of course, their words can be trusted before they sleep with the woman. Before they sleep together, he will do anything she says, but once they do sleep together. Ha! Xianxia shook his head. You win! Xianxia glanced at the surroundings. Shall we go outside now? She glanced to the right. She said that the center of the battlefield is over there. It's very dangerous, but it's definitely filled with fortune too. She gazed at Xianxia, but Xianxia shook his head. What? She smiled. Afraid. Xianxia replied softly. I'm satisfied with what I've already gained. He glanced to the right and continued. People should always... Suddenly Snowy appeared. Xianxia gazed at her and she looked to the right. There was a trace of bewilderment in her eyes. Xianxia asked softly, What is it? Snowy pointed to the right, and then she started waving her paws. Something familiar. Snowy was telling him that she sensed a familiar aura, and she wanted to go over there. A familiar aura. Xianxia glanced to the right and said, You really want to go? Snowy glanced to the right and nodded again. Xianxia thought for a moment and replied, All right, then we'll go. Xianxia gazed at Nanli. What about you? She smiled brilliantly. Of course I'm coming. Xianxia nodded. Then let's do this. They didn't head over immediately because it was getting dark, so they found a place to camp for the night. They hadn't met many people since coming here, but all they met were very, very strong. Especially the old man with a bamboo chest on his back, and that primal emperor. Even though he seemed very amiable, the primal emperor actually possessed terrifying strength. If he'd wanted to kill them, then both he and Nanli wouldn't be able to survive. Xianxia glanced at Nanli, who was seated cross-legged at the side, and entered the primordial pagoda. In the primordial pagoda, Xianxia and Snowy went to a mountain. It was Aria's mountain. She's asked Su Qingshi to construct a palace for her too. But it wasn't huge, it was tiny even. In the palace, Aria was seated cross-legged on the ground with her eyes closed. Once Xianxia and Snowy arrived, she opened her eyes and cracked a smile. Xianxia walked over to Aria and spoke softly. Aria, Qingshi said you haven't been yourself lately. What's wrong? She gazed at him. Big brother Yang, I may be about to advance. Xianxia was delighted. That's a good thing. She blinked. I want to eat that dragon. Xianxia was stunned speechless. Snowy blinked, glanced at Xianxia, and then gazed at Aria. Xianxia gazed at Aria for a long time before he said, Are you serious? She nodded. I really want to eat it, but I know doing that is wrong. Xianxia sighed and walked over to her. He rubbed her head and said, What's going on? Can you explain it to me? She hesitated for a moment and told him about devouring the primal dragon croc. Something worth mentioning was that she'd advanced to the World Lord realm after digesting it. Xianxia fell silent. She wanted to eat the primal true dragon. Not because she wanted to use it to improve her strength, and it was because of her nature. Her nature was urging her to eat it. Not just the primal true dragon. If she hadn't treated Oxy as a friend, she would probably want to eat Oxy too. Meanwhile, Sword Scroll appeared in front of Xianxia. She gazed at Aria and said, Her nature is gradually awakening. She gazed at Xianxia and continued, Tell that dragon to stay far away from her. Xianxia was stunned speechless. Xianxia gazed at Aria for a long time before he gazed at Sword Scroll. Do you know what her true form is? Sword Scroll glanced at the young girl and shook her head. Xianxia recalled the armless and legless man below the ruins of the Northern Sword Sect. Because based on how the man spoke, he seemed to be aware of Aria's origins. Unfortunately, the man didn't tell him. Meanwhile, Aria cracked a smile. Don't worry, I won't eat that little dragon. Yang Yi gazed at her and nodded slightly. I know. While her true form may be that of a great demon, she was still kind. After all, she'd been raised by humans, so her mentality and character were no different than ordinary humans. Yet now, her nature was gradually coming out. Yang Yi didn't know if this was good or bad. He rubbed her head and said, if you need anything, just ask your big sis Xianxia or me. Understand? She nodded, hesitated for a moment and said, I want to go back and see my grandfather. Yang Yi replied, all right, we'll return to the village when we can. She smiled brilliantly. Yang Yi and Sword Scroll left the palace, but Snowy stayed within. According to her, she wanted to play with Area. Void Mountain. At the Ascension platform, Yang Yi sat on the Ascension platform with Sword Scroll by his side. The Ascension platform was on a very tall mountain, and the scene throughout Void Mountain's mountain range could be seen from it. Sword Scroll took a step forward and pointed down at the ground below Void Mountain. The 100,000 swords beneath the mountain seemed to have received some sort of command, and they trembled violently while the Sky Sword platform on Void Mountain trembled as well. The sword formation is ready? Yang Yi gazed at her while speaking with a trace of excitement in his voice. Sword Scroll nodded slightly. I've repaired both sword formations. So long as we have sufficient spirit energy, we can activate them at any time. The formation with 100,000 swords is extremely powerful, and ordinary Limit Breaker realm experts won't be able to resist it at all. According to my estimations, even 2 world realm experts won't be able to resist it. She gazed at the Sky Sword platform and continued, if this sword formation is included, I think instantly killing a 2 world realm expert won't be difficult at all. Yang Yi glanced at Void Mountain and smiled. Presently, he wasn't alone. Not only did he have 2 sword formations, he had Area and Oxy. Besides that, he had numerous precious treasures. It could be said that ordinary Limit Breaker realm experts would be no match for him. Even without those treasures, he was still confident in being able to kill an ordinary Limit Breaker realm expert. He could even fight 2 world realm experts. As for 3 world realm experts, his strength wasn't sufficient to fight them for now. Yang Yi seemed to have thought of something and suddenly asked, Sword Scroll, are there many geniuses in Eternal Kingdom? She nodded slightly. Yes, if compared to Eternal Border. After all, they are blessed by nature. It's like comparing a village and a city. Even if geniuses appear in the village, they can't compare to the geniuses of the city. Yang Yi suddenly asked, do you want to return there? She replied without the slightest hesitation, I do. Yang Yi glanced at her, and he noticed a trace of icy coldness in her eyes. They chatted for a while, and then Yang Yi went to the cultivation room. He sat down cross-legged, and a white jade bottle was before him. It was the divine blood he'd obtained from the old man with a bamboo chest. There wasn't much blood there, only around 5 drops, but the energy they contained was extremely formidable. Yang Yi hesitated for a while and decided against it in the end. He wasn't completely confident in being able to refine and absorb a drop of the blood. Yang Yi put it away and closed his eyes slowly. Cultivate. Fortify his cultivation and cultivate primal profound energy. That was his goal right now, especially primal profound energy. Actually, the primal profound energy was a huge reason why he could swing his sword 4 times with the sword domain. It had very harsh requirements on physical strength and the strength of his arms. If he could attain the 3rd level of primal profound energy, the Heaven Shaker realm, then he would definitely be able to break through and advance to being capable of swinging his sword 5 times with the sword domain. Outside the primordial pagoda, Nanli Meng glanced at Yang Yi, and then she withdrew the thick scroll and started writing, the primal era? Time trickled by, and the sun rose in the horizon. Nanli Meng rolled up the scroll, and Yang Yi appeared here again. He stood up, and his bones started to crack. Especially his arms. A casual swing of them caused the space around them to ripple. Yang Yi took a deep breath, walked over to Nanli Meng and said, let's go. She nodded, stood up, and then started walking to the right of the forest. She suddenly asked, what do you think? Yang Yi was puzzled. About what? She replied softly, that battle. While the desolate race had been forced to retreat, they hadn't been annihilated. I think they'll be back. Xianxia replied with a question. What does that have to do with me? She gazed at him and he chuckled. You aren't thinking of telling me to protect Eternal Kingdom, right? Nanli Meng shook her head. I'm talking about Eternal Border. If the desolate race appears again, they will definitely not spare Eternal Border. At that time, will you take Eternal Border's side? Xianxia was stunned, and then he said, I'd have to be an idiot to do that. Look, so many people here want to kill me. Not only that, they want to take Snowy from me. So, if that day really does come, I'll tell Snowy to take all the spirit energy in Eternal Border, every last bit of it. She took a deep and long glance at him and remained silent. Actually, Xianxia's strength wasn't very important to Eternal Border, and it was Snowy who was truly important. This sprite progenitor wasn't the same sprite progenitor from all those years ago. This one absolutely didn't care about the world. As far as this sprite progenitor was concerned, only Xianxia was most important. If Xianxia told her to take Eternal Border's side, she would. And if Xianxia told her not to, then Nanli Meng knew that the little fellow would absolutely not take Eternal Border's side. The support of a sprite progenitor was too important. Nanli Meng didn't say anything else. She just asked casually, and the fate of Eternal Border actually didn't make much of a difference to her. Moreover, the desolate race may not even return. They sped up, and they saw more and more corpses. Corpses covered the area. Obviously, this battlefield had been sealed up before anyone had cleaned up. Suddenly, a sword howl resounded from far away in the sky. Xianxia and Nanli Meng exchanged glances, and then they went even faster. At a gorge, a sword cultivator was walking slowly with a sword in hand, and a corpse wasn't too far behind him. There was a hole in its forehead. A single attack. The sword cultivator continued deeper into the gorge. The gorge was huge. There were mountains on both sides of it, causing people to feel extremely small while standing within it. The sword cultivator glanced at the mountains on both sides, and countless auras on them moved away. It didn't take long for the sword cultivator to leave the gorge. Outside of it was a boundless grassland, and the grass there was very tall. The sword cultivator continued forward. Everywhere he passed, the grass parted to form a path. Suddenly, the ground before him shook, and then it cracked open to reveal a colossus that was crawling out from down below. It was huge like a hill. It was shaped like a tiger, with legs that were thick as pillars and very long. The colossus had a ferocious appearance, especially its eyes that were very vicious. Besides that, it had a pair of wings. The colossus gazed at the sword cultivator and growled, revealing two long fangs. The sword cultivator glanced at it without even a ripple in his gaze, and then he continued forward. It didn't take long for him to arrive just around 10 m away from it. As far as the demon was concerned, the sword cultivator's actions were a form of provocation. The ferocious demon beast roared furiously at the sword cultivator, and then it pounced at the sword cultivator. It was like a tiger pouncing at its prey, and the powerful impact it had caused space to crack open before it. The sword cultivator didn't stop, and then a ray of light flashed. The sword cultivator was behind the demon beast. The sword cultivator continued forward while the ferocious demon beast had stiffened on the spot behind him. A moment later, it crashed to the ground. A ray of light had pierced its stomach. The demon beast's eyes were opened wide, and its body was twitching incessantly. While it was still alive, it was just a matter of time before it died. The sword cultivator didn't turn around to strike the killing blow. It had been many years since he'd swung his sword a second time against the same target. The reason that demon was still alive was because the sword cultivator hadn't aroused any desire to kill it. That attack hadn't struck any lethal points on it. But even then, the demon couldn't endure the might of it. The sword cultivator walked further and further away, and it didn't take long for him to vanish from the demon beast's field of vision. The demon beast closed its eyes in despair and awaited its end. It had sensed that the sword cultivator was dangerous, but it hadn't expected him to be this dangerous. The sword cultivator continued forward, and it didn't take long for him to stop. He was by the side of a cliff, and a bottomless abyss was before him. At the center of the abyss was a black chair. The chair just stood there. The sword cultivator closed his eyes slowly as he stood there, and then he took a step forward. The chair was in front of him once he took that step. Suddenly, a man appeared on the chair. He had his back to the sword cultivator, and his hair flowed down on the chair. The extremes of the sword Dao. The man spoke abruptly. You're much stronger than that fellow who called himself the sword god all those years ago. Unfortunately, he couldn't even swing his sword before me. The sword cultivator looked down at his sword and spoke softly. I really want to swing my sword seriously. Unfortunately, I've never had a chance. It's a painful, very painful feeling. Ha ha. The man on the chair suddenly started laughing, and his laughter reverberated through the world. All living beings in the area retreated before it and gazed in the abyss direction with fear. The sword cultivator's face was calm, and there wasn't even a slight fluctuation within his eyes. After laughing for a while, the man on the chair suddenly said, Unfortunately, my main body isn't here. Otherwise, I'd like to see if I can make you swing a second time. The sword cultivator said, I'll go look for you. The man shook his head slightly. That isn't necessary. We'll meet very soon. The sword cultivator glanced at him, nodded, and walked away. Suddenly, the man said, The limits of the sword Dao. Needless to say, you've really surprised me. However, do you know what lies after that? The sword cultivator stopped but didn't speak. The man continued, I hope you'll be able to overcome your current shackles before we meet again, because only then will I be a little interested in fighting you. The sword cultivator shook his head slightly. Your limits are not my limits. My limits are no limits. He paused for a moment and continued, Killing you will only take one swing. He vanished once he finished speaking. Meanwhile, the man tapped the armrest of the chair and said, No limits, interesting. Suddenly, he looked to the side. Another extreme? Interesting indeed. Ha ha. Yang Yi and Nanli Meng arrived at a gorge. The gorge stretched far into the distance, and divine senses were frequently sweeping toward them from both sides of it. However, the owners of those divine senses seemed to fear something and didn't charge at them. Yang Yi and Nanli Meng encountered a corpse on the way, and Yang Yi saw a hole from a sword on its forehead. They exchanged glances and continued forward. Once they left the gorge, Yang Yi and Nanli Meng arrived at the grassland. They saw the ferocious demon beast as they passed through it. At this moment, it was on the verge of death. Yang Yi glanced at its stomach, and then he looked off into the distance. Obviously, it was the sword cultivator who'd done that. Nanli Meng suddenly said, This demon is at the two-world realm at the very least. Yang Yi glanced at it, and its eyes were closed tight. Obviously, it was waiting for death to arrive. Suddenly, Snowy appeared here. She glanced at the demon, hesitated for a while, and then flew over to it. After that, she blew lightly, and countless strands of spirit energy enveloped it. Moreover, it even sent a lot of primordial violet energy to it. Once Snowy's spirit energy and primordial violet energy surged into it, it opened its eyes slowly. Its gaze descended upon Snowy, and then it was stunned. Obviously, it had sensed her aura. Snowy patted it on the head, and then it gazed at Snowy for a long time before lowering its head slightly. Nanli Meng's eyes narrowed slightly from the sight of this. She was very well aware of what lowering their heads meant in the world of demon beasts. Submission. Nanli Meng felt that it was quite absurd. A powerful demon had submitted just like that. However, when she thought of Snowy's identity, she immediately came to an understanding. Snow was a sprite progenitor. A sprite progenitor. Nanli Meng shook her head. Could any monstrous genius even compare to Snowy? The answer was no. Yang Yi glanced at the ferocious demon beast, and then he asked inwardly, Sword Scroll, is this demon safe? This demon was a two-world realm expert at least, so if it attacked, it would be a serious issue for them. A moment of silence ensued, and then Sword Scroll's voice resounded in Yang Ye's mind. A primal vicious tiger. It's very vicious, but since it was willing to submit to Snowy, then it represents that it won't be a problem. In the world of great demons, once they lower their heads, they practically never go back on their word. Moreover, if it causes trouble in the primordial pagoda, it would be very easy to deal with it. Xianxia thought for a moment and he felt that it made sense. There was no one ordinary within the pagoda, especially those two sword formations that could be used now. Just like that, another powerful demon took up residence within the primordial pagoda. At the mountain range behind Void Mountain, it was where Xianxia had prepared for all these demons because they preferred to reside in the mountains. However, Xianxia knew that they were very territorial, so regardless of whether it was Oxy, the primal true dragon, or this new primal vicious tiger, he'd given them clear territories and prohibited them from act willfully. He didn't want them to enter into battle. While Oxy's cultivation and strength were inferior to the primal vicious tiger, if Oxy had the primordial acts of creation, it could still fight the primal vicious tiger. As for the primal true dragon, Xianxia hadn't discovered anything special about it. However, he knew that fellow should not be weak. After all, it was a primal true dragon. Outside the pagoda, Nanli Meng glanced at Xianxia and said, "Congratulations, you've gained another powerful assistant. Now, I have to worry for those fellows in the outside world." Powerful demon. According to her knowledge, Xianxia had two demons already within his primordial pagoda. Besides the mysterious young girl, those demons were absolutely capable of crushing ordinary limit-breaker realm experts. Practically all the experts who were managing those powers in the outside world were just ordinary limit-breaker realm experts. So, if they encountered Xianxia, they would die before they even knew it. Especially when Xianxia had so many treasures. For example, the seal of suppression and that mirror. Even she didn't dare to say that she could deal with him. They continued forward, and it didn't take long for them to arrive at a cliff. They saw the chair below, and there was nothing on it. They exchanged glances and were about to head down there, but Snowy suddenly pointed to the right. Obviously, she wanted Xianxia to go that way. Xianxia didn't hesitate to go toward the right. Nanli Meng glanced down at the chair from the cliff, and then she followed Xianxia. Actually, she wanted to go down and have a look, but she sensed danger. True danger. Her intuition told her not to go down there. She believed her intuition. Snowy led them to the right, and it didn't take long for them to arrive before an ocean of flowers. It was unlike the other areas here. It was filled with spirit energy, extremely abundant spirit energy, and the spirit energy here was a little special. It was almost similar to Snowy's spirit energy. Snowy glanced at the surroundings, and then she sniffed. In an instant, countless strands of spirit energy surrounded her. Suddenly, a woman in a white dress appeared in the ocean of flowers. Xianxia had met her in the past. It had been in the rear mountains of Eternal Village. The sprite progenitor. She turned around and waved at Snowy. The latter hesitated for a moment and gazed at Xianxia. Xianxia thought for a moment and nodded. Snowy cracked a smile at Xianxia and flew over to her. Snowy had slight bewilderment in her eyes as she gazed at the woman. The woman rubbed Snowy's head lightly. "I was worried that this world would be without a sprite progenitor. Luckily, the heavens never go to such extremes." A ray of white light suddenly appeared in her grasp, and then a white key appeared around Snowy's neck. Snowy grabbed the white key in her paw and looked up at the woman with a questioning gaze in her eyes. The woman grinned. "Sprite Hall's key. From this moment onward, you're the next master of Sprite Hall. Right, there are lots of treasures in there. All of them are yours now." "Treasures?" Snowy's eyes lit up when she heard that. The woman shook her head and smiled, and then she gazed at Xianxia. Since she's a sprite progenitor, she has some responsibilities, and she must shoulder them. Xianxia replied with a question. Why should she? Responsibilities? That had nothing to do with Snowy. He didn't want Snowy to have some responsibilities for no reason. Why? The woman walked over to him. Because she's the sprite progenitor. Xianxia shook his head. As far as I'm concerned, she's not a sprite progenitor, she's just Snowy. How ignorant! The woman closed her eyes slowly. I feel a little regretful that I didn't kill you that day. You'll only bring harm to her. Snowy was immediately furious when she heard the woman. And then she flew over to Xianxia's shoulder and glared angrily at the woman. The intimacy Snowy had displayed toward the woman had vanished completely. Senior. Meanwhile, Nanli Meng spoke abruptly. She is a sprite progenitor, but it doesn't represent that she must shoulder any responsibilities. Or I should say that you should force your will onto her, right? The woman glanced at Nanli Meng and shook her head. Do you know why sprite progenitors possess a special status? Nanli Meng shook her head. She explained, it's because sprite progenitors can control spirit energy and summon the spirit of all things. Only by grasping all of that can she possess that special status, and only then will some people and powers fear her. Otherwise, even if she becomes a sprite progenitor, she still may be imprisoned and become someone or some power's private property. This responsibility is mostly for her own protection. Nanli Meng fell silent. Snowy didn't have the ability to protect herself at all right now. Meanwhile, the woman gazed at Yang Yi. Her identity made her bound to be extraordinary. If she's ordinary, only death awaits. Understand? Yang Yi fell silent. Her gaze descended onto Snowy again. She pointed at the key on Snowy's neck. If you go to Eternal Kingdom in the future, there's a place called Myriad Mountains. An old man lives there, and you can go seek his help if you encounter trouble. He owes me a favor, so he can help you. Of course, the precondition is that he's still alive. Her figure gradually turned ethereal once she finished speaking. However, right when she was about to vanish completely, she suddenly looked to the right and frowned. Leave! Right now!